few days ago, I sat on my bed and turned on the first Transformers movie.
What's cracking, little bitches? This looks like a cool place to kick it.
And man, I can tell that I freaking love that shit. I mean, who doesn't love Transformers? They just made up all of our childhood, and it was an amazing feeling to experience that again. But as a gaming enthusiast that I am, I couldn't help myself but think about the legendary Cybertron franchise. I mean, it was the best franchise Transformers universe had, and we all loved it. But I couldn't remember when and why did these games stop coming out. I mean, we haven't got a proper Transformers game since 2015, and I don't think it's me. I think that is just crazy. So I was a little bit shocked, and I decided to research and understand what happened to these games. To make it easier to follow, I structured this video in 4 main parts: how it all began, the rise, the peak, and the downfall. To understand how it all began, we gotta answer some questions like, who made the original Transformers games everybody loved? Did they make them with passion and understanding of the franchise, and did they focus the main story onto something different than the actual movies? So the brains behind the fan favorite Cybertron series were High Moon Studios, and they weren't just another studio. They were the guys who wanted a proper Transformers game for over a decade. They were basically fans since day one. You see, they really love Transformers, and when they eventually got the license to make the game, they jumped right to it and dedicated basically their life to making of that game. You can even hear one of the developers saying this in an interview.
I want to make the game that I've been waiting 25 years to play.
And I need to be honest, watching those interviews changed how I looked at the first and every other game. And you gotta realize one thing: when you have a studio working on a game they're actually passionate about, really nothing can stop them. Even if they don't got the skills to make what they imagine at the given moment, they will either learn them or hire someone who can do it. So the thing that made the game stand out from the movies was that everybody knows that Transformers were set and are still set on the Earth. So the idea High Moon had was to explore the homeland of Autobots and Decepticons, of course, Cybertron.
We are autonomous robotic organisms from the planet Cybertron.
Because, and I quote, we felt like the fans deserved an explanation of their favorite Transformers backstory. One thing that I didn't mention that is very important is that High Moon were not independent, they were under Activision. So that meant that a lot of things they potentially wanted to do needed to be approved by the license owners, and those were Hasbro. But luckily for them, Hasbro didn't think much about it and approved the story of the game to be set on Cybertron. Hasbro even went as far to give High Moon almost complete creative freedom, and man, did High Moon take advantage of that in a good way. They basically changed every character model to be more realistic and raw to match the atmosphere of the world they were in, so that meant that they were different than in the movies. And I really don't think people appreciated this enough, because the amount of balls to take this risk and the stress that comes with it is just not everyone's cup of tea. But fans absolutely love that change. So for the making of the first game, War for Cybertron, they wanted to go all in and make the gameplay the best thing in the whole game, and they even mentioned that in their interview, and I can happily tell you that they succeeded, because fans couldn't stop talking about it, especially when it first released. They almost near perfected everything this game needed. The transforming from a vehicle to an Autobot or a Decepticon was so sick and smooth, and it really gave you that feeling that you really matter in that universe. Because this wasn't just some random animation that they threw into the game to fill in the gaps. Transforming was one of the biggest parts of the gameplay, and every choice of when you're gonna transform matters. Because if you transform too late, you are on a higher risk of getting gunned down. On the other hand, if you transform too early, you might not be able to make the best possible advantage of the situation. And fans really rock with that shit, since it made them feel something they never experienced before. An actual feeling that they became what they loved their whole life. Another thing that just made this game even better was it was a co-op game with up to 2 friends, which just added to the experience, and people will play this game day and night, literally non-stop. And not even to mention the multiplayer modes. There were so many, and they were all so sick. Also, you needed to make your own Transformer, and I can tell you that people went crazy with this feature. I mean, who wouldn't? Just imagine the creative freedom you could get of making your own Transformer. It really felt like childhood was fulfilled. But like any other game, it had some problems, and the biggest one was that sometimes it felt like enemies were focusing on you too much, even when their main objective should be to destroy something or someone that you or your friends are not controlling. But with all this being said, fans still love this game, and surprisingly enough, reviews and critics loved it as well. I mean, there was a time when the critics could actually tell if the game was good or not like today. Now, I know I said there were 4 main parts, but I kinda lied to you, because there was a time when it seemed like the downfall started, and that was with the release of the second High Moon Transformers game, Dark of the Moon. This game served as a prologue or a prequel to the third Transformers movie. They needed to time the making of of the game to the release of the third movie, which meant they had to rush the whole development, which resulted in, you guessed it, not that good game. It had rushed gameplay and the whole game was all over the place. And at that time really felt like the first game was a one-hit wonder and that we'll never get a Transformers game as good as the first one. But we can say that High Moon still delivered as good as they could, and they did a pretty good job on boss fights. Like really, they were sick. But besides that, basically everything was rushed. The game was spread in 7 main chapters, with each one focusing on the story of another Transformer, which just felt forced and the fans could recognize. The enemies and the levels were repetitive also. It literally seemed like a survive waves of enemies game, but with the same enemies all over again. The textures were not that great also. You could see a lot of non-loaded stuff just in the middle of your playthrough, and one thing that frustrated everyone was that out of nowhere just random load times were breaking the smoothness of the actual gameplay. But I believe that if this game wasn't forced to be rushed because of the movie, it could have been a pretty solid Transformers game. Now, with everyone waiting for the sequel of the first War for Cybertron game, High Moon Studios took their time to make the next game, Fall of Cybertron. This was just absolute cinema. You can see that the game was made with actual love and passion, and they went as far as making this game better than the first, which at that time sounded very ambitious and like it couldn't be done, but once again they proved everyone wrong. They poured in their hearts in this project, and what they did was amazing. One of the biggest improvements from the first game is that every Autobot had its own unique abilities. Some had grappling, some had strength. It really just added to the variety and killed the possible repetitive. They somehow made transforming even sicker and smoother, which left everyone surprised. Like, remember what I told you about the transforming in the first game? Well, this was it, just 3 times better. Levels were not repetitive, which meant entertainment and something new in each one of them. The story was very memorable and it left us with a very emotional ending, since it showed the brutality and the desperation of the Decepticons under Megatron and survival and, we can say, heroism in Autobots trying to save what was left of their world. And the saddest thing is that at the end nobody actually won, because Autobots survived but they're left with nothing. And once again, critics love this game. Most of them were rating it higher than the first, and if I'm being honest, it deserved that rating since it really was the best Transformers game we've gotten to this day. Now, one thing the fans criticized the most was that it had no longer a co-op story, but it had many multiplayer sections that were really fun to play, and it was something that made this game live forever. Well, that's a bad way to say it, because these games no longer exist. I mean, they technically do, but since the license expired, you can no longer buy them, and that's what we'll get to right now. You see, everything was going the way High Moon planned it until around 2012, when they got a task to make a Deadpool game. It came about a character that nobody really gave a shit about at that time, since the first movie released in 2016, and from that point on everything started going downhill because the release of that game interfered a lot with Transformers games, as it was not a success. We can even say it was a pretty big failure, which resulted in Activision firing over 40 developers that worked on the Deadpool game, and among those names, of course, were many developers who worked on the Transformers games. And to top it all off, High Moon was no longer a studio that was going to make future Transformers games. At that time, Activision saw a huge pile of money from Call of Duty games and decided they should focus on their own franchises instead of licensed games, but they gave Transformers games one more shot, this time handing the development of the next game to Edge of Reality. So as expected, they made a pretty bad game. The game was called Rise of the Dark Spark, and it basically included everything that was wrong from the previous Transformers game. It had some laggy points, the transformations weren't as thick as they're supposed to be, and the worst of it all, the story focused on the Dark Spark, which is just their version of Allspark that we all know from the movie. So to sum it up real quick, the story was that they were on a mission to recover the Dark Spark, aka Allspark, that Megatron wanted to use to finally destroy Autobots. Yeah, basically same as the movie. And don't get me wrong, to people that haven't played previous Transformers games, this game had a pretty solid story, but for OG fans who were waiting for something to enjoy again, it felt pretty boring. And genuinely, one of the weirdest things is that the levels of this game felt pieced together from other Cybertron games, which just made like no sense. Like, if you're making a new game, is it that hard to think of something new, or were they just lazy? One thing that made Transformers games developed by High Moon so special was that they didn't just want to take the same audio from the movies. Instead, they recreated every sound effect themselves, and with Edge of Reality, that just wasn't the case. It had repetitive audio and generic repetitive voice lines, which got pretty frustrating pretty quickly. Hell, not even online could have saved this game, since it just felt like you were getting attacked by the same wave of enemies over and over again. And as expected, fans didn't love much of it, neither the critics. So there you have it, the entire history of Transformers games. And one thing I noticed while making this video is that at the end of the day, if you're passionate enough about a project, it is gonna work. And the fans are gonna see it and support you through a journey. Kinda what I'm doing right now. So I ask you, if you genuinely enjoyed this video, leave a sub, maybe a like, and let me know down in the comments what you think. Was Activision the main villain here that ruined everything, or did Hamon just fuck themselves up with the Deadpool game?